I would say, obviously, and I think this has become the number one answer the past couple years, sim racing is the number one way to racing, period, right now.
Green flag.
Welcome to the Blind Apex Podcast, where amateur club racers tune in to get faster.
This episode is brought to you by DHWorks Fuel Systems. Use Apex 10 at checkout to save on fueling your passion. Speaking of discounts, use Blind Apex 2025, all one word, to save 20% off a monthly or annual Race Setup Pro plan. They are directly supporting the podcast, so if you're interested, check them out. 2026 has been... It's been the year of youngsters, and to talk about switching cars, and so far, that's sort of what we've been into. So joining me, I've seen him and his father in the paddock from time to time, and they definitely are hustling. And if you follow OG Racing, he's the slender model they use for all their suits, and he does all the best glove work, okay? I'm telling you. He's a sim racer. He's a fellow Firelapse user, which I may have to have you come back on so you can teach me how to use this thing. But yeah, CRX racer turned Miata racer. I don't know what it is with you kids and Miatas, but whatever. Okay, sure. 2022 Washington, D.C. region SCCA Rookie of the Year. I will contend you're probably the youngest guy in that paddock still to date. Deacon Greenfield, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. No stranger to podcasting. You've been on Race FF with Jaime before. I know because I listened to that show. And I was like, oh, you had Deacon on. So,
yeah, that was my first ever podcast experience. So I'm happy to be back in another setting like this, especially on this a great podcast like Blind Apex.
I appreciate it. Yeah, we're doing our best these days. Getting a podcast through the holiday season is a struggle, but it's a new year. I've got a whole new segment. I don't know. It didn't go out. Maybe it did go out. I don't know. We'll see. I can't remember if I did it on the very first episode that was going to be out in January. So anyway, so before we get into everything, where can people find you? Because I always bury that lead and then I have to answer that question 30 or 40 times in DMs. So
yeah, you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at DG32_racing. You can also find me on YouTube at Deacon Greenfield Racing. And you can as well find me on Facebook at Deacon Greenfield.
So here's my question for you, Deacon. Are you old enough to have an alcoholic beverage in the United States yet?
I am not old enough to have a legal alcoholic beverage yet. This year, I will be.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm just trying to set the stage because I want to know where this whole racing thing started for you.
Yeah, I love telling the story about it because it's a little more unconventional, but I also happen to run across people who have a similar experience. As a kid, I was always interested in, vehicles like everyone would. My father was 20 years in the Air Force. He had a 1991 Celica GTS that was super sleek. It was the hatchback, and I loved it. But when I was a kid, first early on, I was really into trains. And, that was just from kid shows like Tom's the Tank Engine. And it was just what clicked on first. But the racing bug caught me after my father brought home, because we would have family movie nights, and we still do. But my father found a collection of the Hot Wheels Acceleracers movies at I think they were in a bargain bin or something, but he found the collection of them. And he actually didn't know if I would like it. And he told that he was unsure if I would like those movies. And the first night, I was immediately just hooked on cars and racing. The trains were no more. Trains were gone. It was all about cars, and it was all about racing. And I absolutely fell in love with racing from there. And it only snowballed and snowballed into where we are today.
Oh man, I need to get my hands on those movies for my nephews, but
They're great. They hold up to this day for sure.
yeah, you're only 20, so that snowballed pretty quick. You know, my story, I tried after college, you know, going to the track isn't necessarily cheap, family obligations and such aside, trying to get my career started in a certain direction. You know, I didn't really start racing until I was 39. So it's a much different story than yours. So let's talk about what's your end goal? What's driving you to keep going?
My end goal is professional racing. I, from a young age, around that time, while the snowball was rolling, I always felt like once I discovered what professional racing was, like once my dad started to introduce me to the other avenues of racing, like NASCAR and like sports car racing, and I didn't grow up in a racing household like some others did, where they got it from their parents or from their extended family. We kind of learned about racing together, and I just was always fascinated with the idea of making racing a livelihood and making the thing that you love the most important thing, and always being a competitive person, wanting to compete and wanting to be the best like everyone in the sport wants to be. So I started with RC cars, little step zero to where most people start in like karting per se. My father and I started with remote control cars, and from there we learned about the inner workings of racing together. We found a local club that raced the RC cars in a back parking lot, and I started to learn about racing lines and tires and setup. And from there, the moment that I knew that I really wanted to be a professional was whenever I would try to explain what I like to do as a hobby to someone, or like someone's parents, or like one of my other classmates in school, and they would always say, "Oh, that's a cool hobby." And the word hobby just didn't sit right. I always just thought of it, even at 8 years old, driving an RC car only a little bigger than my foot in a parking lot. I always thought that it was just the first step towards becoming a professional. So I never lost the idea of wanting to do this at the top level that I could possibly be.
So I'm going to take us off track immediately, which is my job as the host. So were you running in Manassas at the high school?
Yes, yeah. If you know RCR&V, so like Chris Witt, we were running behind the Osborne Park High School in their student driver's ed lot. And I think my dad discovered their group by Facebook. He was just looking for tips and tricks on how to develop RC racing, and he kind of walked across them, and then we went out there to see what they were about, and they were super accepting, and you know, eventually I got a little better with controlling the car, and then we turned up there every Sunday that we could, and just raced and did what we could with the knowledge we had, and luckily all those guys are super nice, and they kind of all just started mentoring me in their own ways, through trial and error, some through like actual coaching, and none of them ever turned me away from it. None of them ever really tried to say, "Oh, you're just a kid, you don't belong with us." They all just saw me as one of them, even though they were all adults doing it as a hobby, and they saw this kid that was passionate, and I think that definitely helped towards the encouragement to be a professional. We always operated like it was a club weekend. Like it's very similar to the SCCA or NASA events that we do. You know, you show up, you bring your car, you register, and then we race. We're competitive, but it's also laid back and fun. So it was a very influential point at that young age towards not just being like bumper cars where most people think RC cars are. They're just cheap little toys, but we're playing with $300 to $800 RC cars that are much higher, like the ones that I don't think our viewers could see, but that you have in your background. But yeah, we had the asphalt. So we started with the HPI brand.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if
I'm familiar. I actually raced vintage with them for a little over a year.
Yeah.
So
yeah, VTA is one of the best classes. It's like Spec Miata, where it's slower, but it's super competitive and fun. So yeah, it was just a blast, and I can't say anything bad about it.
Yeah. You don't know this, but I did a father-daughter podcast that'll come out the week before this one. Okay. And I just think it's important. It's imperative for our sport that the kids get some taste. Now, I had a lot of money in my vintage car. My VTA car was not. It was on the $70,000 Spec Miata realm.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I know how that is.
When you talk about an $800, RC touring car, I'm like, what else did you do to it? Because there's thousands of dollars you could pour into these things, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But the processes are the same, right? You have a post-race check. And Lord, if you want to learn about suspension, you can learn all sorts of things,
Absolutely, you can.
Yeah. So I think it's a good process. I wouldn't always call it cheap. And there definitely aren't. On-road touring car racing is very limited these days. So I don't even know if they're still doing it. So
yeah, RCR&V does still do it, although most of the on-road racers, at least around here that I know of, kind of more transition into the carpet racing, which has always been really big. We just never did. I actually just did my first actual carpet race last month at the new IMRC that's in the Manassas Mall. That was my first time actually racing on carpet. I had just done a couple laps on it, but it's very different than asphalt. And I think the reason that it's like you said, it's very important for kids to get the taste. You could go either way with either the RC or the sim racing. But I would say the best way is to do both, because what I got from the RC racing was the understanding and the physical touch of how the suspension, how it compresses and gear ratios and physically changing them. And it just gives a little bit more of a sense of responsibility that it's something that can physically break and physically hold. But I thought it was the best thing ever. And I would encourage many more kids to do it, because it's a perfect low scale intro to racing. And like you said, on outside asphalt is a lot harder to find, but there are quite a few, at least even in our area in Virginia, there's quite a few indoor tracks like carpet and also off-road indoor as well.
Yeah, we locally in Winchester, there's a off-road indoor outdoor. I wouldn't go there when it's freezing cold, but when it's warm, rain or shine, Adrenaline RC in Winchester is a great place to go. Okay, so you mentioned the sim, and that's sort of where I wanted to go next. So what kind of sim regiment are you in right now? I mean, it's winter. I get it, but...
Yeah, Yeah, I mainly do iRacing.
Mhm.
I got heavy into sim in 20. We got our rig built in early 2020. We were actually really lucky. It was about over the Christmas time, like 2019 into 2020.
Just
So we
before
were
the
really
COVID
lucky
scare.
just before COVID. Yeah. So we were really lucky to have gotten everything or most everything. I mean, I had already had like a wheel and pedals for like a PlayStation little setup, but I did not have iRacing until we went in and we were like, let's take a step up and practice. And this was about the time that I was still doing like rental karting around, so wanted something else to practice on and develop. And so we went ahead and got a next level racing cockpit. We decided to go with the triple monitor setup. My father also loves flying and aircraft simulators, so we could kind of do both a racing simulator and a flight sim that doubles. And yeah, it's been a very, very big tool towards, and especially after that first year in iRacing where I was on it quite a bit, even to the extreme of, I think within 7 months, I had already participated in my first 24-hour race. And it immediately following that next season of when everything started back up, I was so much better prepared in car control, in line choice, in overtaking. So the sim world is so vast and so helpful nowadays, and even more than just iRacing. Some of my other favorite sims would be like BeamNG Drive and Seto Corsa, all great sims that I use regularly.
Yeah. So are you just in the official races and working ladders? Are you doing league play? Like, what are you doing when you're on there?
I do a lot of league, specifically the Full Send Sims League. So we have a Spec Miata racing league that we actually just finished a couple weeks ago. And then I do officials from time to time. I am definitely working on getting some more official races going, but mostly I like to do the GR Cup and some GT3 in there. So mostly sports car, I would say, is my forte. But I would say the league stuff is what I mostly find myself doing.
So, which came first, your race car or the sim?
For the full-size car, the sim came first.
Okay.
So at least my story into getting into full-size cars, it was kind of over the sim time was right, obviously, when COVID hit around 2020, 2022. And we just decided that I would continue running rental karting and sim racing until I developed my skills a little better. And then come 2022, I felt ready to step into the full-size cars after doing several years in karting as well as competition KA100cc karting. Then we stepped into the world of the SCCA, thanks to doing research, and through friends that we also knew, we found RP Performance, where I rented the NA SSM. So started in the Miata, and we did the school in 2022, and then a little bit of start the story on the CRX. My school was over my birthday weekend during the school. So it was over the Saturday, Sunday. My birthday was on the Saturday. And a friend of ours, it was actually someone that I met from RC. He was kind of a longtime mentor, gifted the CRX to me as a birthday gift. And he was like, let's build a race car. You're obviously making the big jump to jump into full-size cars. Let's get you a car that is 100% yours. And so that first year was great. We went through the very very popular SSM class, 50 car fields were just so awesome, and it felt exactly like from the sim, but there's nothing that could match that, the real feel of it.
So, okay. What car in iRacing do you compare to you had an NA, correct?
Yeah, so we were renting the NA.
Mm-hmm.
I practiced with the Legacy MX5, and I still do. So it's the 2008 or 2010 MX5, still one of the last surviving stick shift cars that's in iRacing. But I practiced with that, and I still do. That's the same car that we run in the FSS league race. So that is the old Cup car before the ND current Cup car. And it is more powerful than the NA. So at the time, it was a little bit different. I had to adapt my, like the timing and the tires were a lot different. But using that now for practice with our current MX5, it's almost spot on because it is the same platform, and the Spec MX5 class is based off of the NC Cup car rules and build. So it's a great tool for, I would say it's probably the best momentum car stick shift manual practice that's currently still in iRacing.
Okay. I'm going to have to go look that up. So let's talk about this a little bit. So you went from an NA, you drove the CRX for a while, and now you're in an NC?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll start back where we were in the school. So the plan was with the CRX to build the CRX as kind of a hands-on shop project, learn. I mean, I always liked to tinker, but my high school did not have a shop class, so I didn't get to have a whole lot of hands-on working on a car time. So that was kind of like the hands-on project to teach the inner workings more so, and also have our own car so we wouldn't have to worry about renting. We could take it wherever we wanted to. But during 2022, we rented the SSM from RP for almost all the races in the Mars series here at Summit Point, exception of the last race of the year. I did my first away race at New Jersey Motorsports Park. We did great, finished 6th out of, I don't remember how many was in the championship that year, but we ended up being the first 3-way rookies of the year with my friends Jameson and Morgan. And then that next year, we spent throughout the whole year building the Honda. So we did the roll cage from Piper Motorsports. We put in the conies ourselves, and we kept the car down at our family farm in North Carolina. So we would just go down occasionally, work on the car, test drive the car. And then at the end of the year in 2022, we put it on track at Summit Point for the first time. And then over that winter into 2023, we painted it red. We put a big honking wing on it that didn't need to be there yet. And we went with it. We got it to a point where we felt good about racing it, and then got it logbooked for 2023 and started racing in Super Touring Light. Since then, it has not raced in any other class with the exception of an appearance at Hyperfest this year in HFGT, but it was always the developmental project car from the start to this, all the way up to this year. So 3 years plus a little bit of project build testing time in 2022 with the CRX.
And now you're renting an NC?
So now we actually did purchase the NC.
Okay.
So our friends from RP Performance had an NC for sale, and our goal was to always step up and find the best path to get into professional racing. So we decided to pivot this year towards the very popular Spec MX5 class, and we've been over this winter developing the car into a new platform. It was built for those familiar with SCCA IT, it was Improved Touring S class. So now we are building the car towards spec MX5, and we're very excited to be back in a spec class versus this Super Touring class, which was a very, very, very good learning experience building a car for this. I'm sure you're familiar with in Honda Challenge, building a car for a class that has quite a few things you can do to it is not always the most straightforward thing.
Oh, it's not straightforward, but I enjoy it. I'm a tinkerer. I think I would get bored in a spec class. Like once you get it to a certain point and you can't do what you want to do, it gets a little rough, but for me. But okay, here's my question for you is which one do you prefer, the NA, the CRX, or the NC?
That's the question for sure that we get from a lot of people now that I've driven both. I got to say, when I started racing the NA, I never thought about front wheel drive. I had always gotten the impression of front wheel drive from like games or the sim, where there wasn't a whole lot of tuning you could do to really get them to come alive like you can in real life. So I always thought, ooh, front wheel drive, yucky. It wasn't fun. But once I learned more about car setup and like you said, and I always enjoy those classes that have differences in the engineering and the driver skill, where you see like in IMSA with GTP or Formula One, where you have the engineering differences, but they can still race close. I always enjoyed that. But I also enjoyed the spec racing and the ability that it was only down to the driver, and having both of those experiences I'm very grateful for. But I gotta say, the CRX, I learned a driving style that I hadn't known before until that car, and that became very fun to throw it into a corner and instead of lift and bounce, just hammer down and plow out of it. It became very fun and almost addicting to feel the rear just slide into the corner while you're still on power. But I gotta say, the rear wheel drive of the NC, the balance and how aggressive you can be on it and still feel completely in control, I'd probably give it to the NC. Give it to the Mazda would be the best so far.
I mean, it has the most tech. It is the correct wheel drive in quotation marks.
Yeah.
Jaime's over there screaming at me right now.
Sorry, Jaime.
Yeah, sorry. The thing for me is, you're right. The Sims, they do not portray front wheel drive cars correctly. At least they're not like any front wheel drive I've driven. I mean, outside of maybe a factory car, right? You have to make them rotate. And in the games, you can never make them rotate. It's impossible for me to drive those front wheel drive cars in the sim. My car, my 8th gen Civic, feels a lot like the ND MX5 Cup car. It just does, yeah. I mean, I can't throttle oversteer it, okay? But you have to get in iRacing, you have to get the ND a little out of shape, right? To then induce the throttle oversteer. There are some corners and some tracks, yes, you can just do it. But in general, you have to be a little over the top, right? Mine obviously won't throttle oversteer its front wheel drive car. But other than that, like when I'm running it at Summit, and if I run my same points at Summit Point that I run in my race car, like all my markers, it behaves just like my car, which is ridiculous. But so.
Yeah, the MX5 Cup car, I definitely know what you mean, where it can get the same like front wheel drive where the rear will slide out under braking. So I can definitely see that. And I experienced the same thing for the very first time that when I learned about the trick with front wheel drive to, remove the front sway bar and go with a big stiff rear bar. The very first time of me getting used to that as I progressed with the CRX, it was a big lesson because that was the first time the car really snapped on me. And while we were testing at the Shenandoah track at Summit Point. But yeah, I will be forever grateful of the driving style that I learned with front wheel drive because it gave me a much larger appreciation for weight transfer. And I did have somewhat of that sense in the NA, but I think I could definitely take what I learned in the front wheel drive car now going back to a rear wheel drive car, and it will help progress what I will try to do with the car that I wouldn't have if I had only stayed in rear wheel drive. So it's kind of like, you need to try this for a little bit so this becomes better in the future. And like I said, it's such a tough decision because front wheel drive became really, really fun, especially since the past 3 years it has been predominantly what I've been racing. I've predominantly been racing the CRX with a couple here and there in different cars. Like I got to try an FE2 for 2 weekends. I got to try an EF-ITA Civic, which was very fun. So and as well as a regular NB spec Miata for 1 weekend. But the CRX was my main car, and that oversteer was definitely something that had to be learned and refined. But over time, it became the normal, and it was such a blast that I started to think, oh, maybe I do enjoy front wheel drive more than rear wheel drive. But the rear wheel drive is it's so traditional, and it's just there's a reason that everything is rear wheel drive in pro racing. So, but I will always be grateful for front wheel drive.
So what did you have to have quicker hands in the CRX or the NA Miata?
I had to have quicker hands in the CRX once I got it to that like rotate point. The first year, the car was a boat. It was too high off the ground. We didn't have a front splitter. We had thrown on the PCI wing that was super, super high. And we had the front sway bar, and it was an HF. So it didn't have a stock rear sway bar. So it had the stock front sway bar for a time. And like going through turn 5 at Summit, every lap, my wrists would touch to each other because I was just getting the car to turn. And then over time, as I got more used to the car, we got the suspension set up right. We built a splitter. We took out the front sway bar and then added a rear sway bar. And then I had to learn that release of the weight transfer, when to get on the gas at the proper time, and how to get it to go through. But I loved how aggressive it felt once we had that dialed, how I could go into a corner. I just felt like I threw it in and not like I set it up. So that was really fun. And I found myself liking a pointier front wheel drive car, but not a pointy rear wheel drive car. So it was very interesting to learn both and dial that in. But yeah, the fast hands definitely, once I learned it, saved me a couple times. Even this past year saved me a couple times from the typical front wheel drive bite.
So you said pointy. Let's define that for folks. What is a pointy car to you?
So a pointy car for me would be on the brakes. Once the weight transfer goes to the front, the rear breaks loose very quickly. So it doesn't feel like it's rolling in. It feels like it just sits down on the front and you point and shoot and go. Not necessarily like with a rear wheel drive car where it's much more of a bounce setup and you arc it in to the corner. With front wheel drive, being that there's just no weight in the rear, though I would describe pointy as super, super stiff rear, softer front, big rear sway bar, and where the rear just feels like it's on the edge at all times, and the front is like a shopping cart with sticky tires on the front and caster wheels on the back, and you're just controlling it through the whole corner.
Yeah, to me it means you get the predominant amount of rotation you're going to get in the corner pre-apex.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that way, from apex out, you truly are unwinding the wheel. So, before the apex, sometimes you're unwinding the wheel. So, okay. So, I wanted to get your perspective a little bit and see if you had any tips for younger folks like yourself who are like, all right, I want to get into this, or newbie drivers, because not everybody's going to be that young, but new folks that are like, I want to get into this racing game. Do you have any tips for them? Maybe to, I don't know, save their sanity, help them save money. I don't know. Any tips for them?
I would say, obviously, and I think this has become the number one answer the past couple years, sim racing is the number one way to racing, period, right now. It has developed so fast to the point whereas like a couple or 10 or 20 years ago, a really rookie driver would be in their mid-20s, and now you have people that are getting into some of the fastest cars in the world, and they're 18 years old. And it's purely for how easy it is to get into sim racing, how easy it is to do as many laps as possible, how realistic everything is. But at the same time, I would also say that hands-on feel is very needed. And I think RC cars are a very overlooked entry point of getting into racing. It does seem silly at first to some people, but when you really realize how much it translates in terms of setup and hands-on and the competition, obviously you don't get that feel of you sitting in the car and seeing it out the window, but you get it from the bird's eye view. You're standing on a ladder and you can see the whole track. You can see exactly where your car is placed when you're going into the corner. So you can tell exactly, if it's understeering, you can see it from the top down. I would say do a mix of both. Do a mix of sim racing and RC racing or karting as just a way of getting in and having both sides of the tactile feel, and then having the theory of sim racing and having unlimited laps and unlimited resources. And those two combinations together will accelerate you into a competitive mindset and knowledgeable mindset so quickly that you'll be ahead of the curve and, be a professional level racer by, early teen years.
So one thing I want to add to that, because I don't disagree. I think barrier to entry in the sim world is probably cheaper than people realize. I'm a triple 27s, lightly upgraded micro center computer and used sim magic gear setup, and I think I have like $2,000 in it, and on a sim seats chassis, no less. So like chassis, triple monitors, all of that, right? Obviously bigger monitors, higher, more expensive CPUs, all that gets in the way, but that's how you don't need it to get to be competitive, right? But the one thing I think is you have crew that helps you, right?
Yeah. So at the moment, what we do is, we're a family team at the moment. So, we've with some friends and family, we built the CRX, and then also with the help of outsourcing shops, like I mentioned before, Angry Sheep and King Motorsport, or not King, Piper Motorsports. We operate out of our own garage. We tinker on and fix on the car ourselves. And at times we've had crews like RP Performance help us out. But it's still, like you said, it's not necessary. You can still get into racing, and even though cost is always the question, you can do this by yourself at any level, technically.
Yeah. I was just thinking, for the youngsters out there, if they could find somebody to crew for, volunteer for the day.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
See what it's all about. Somebody will feed you. That's not a problem. There's always extra waters in the cooler, right? Like, it's not the end of the world, but go see what it's really about, especially the hands-on stuff, and see the process and see what you need, see what's nice to have, see what the day looks like. Go to a driver's meeting, I think that'll help people figure things out. But you're not wrong. This transition from sim racing to race cars, now I know they're putting up money, right? It's not free. You're not going from a sim rig usually to a race car without putting up money. But the transition in skill seems to be pretty close to 1-to-1. So
yeah, it's so good now in terms of, and like you said, you don't need the equipment. I know people who have set world records on a single monitor and a wheel that's been outdated for 10 years in iRacing. So the equipment is just nice, and it does help to an extent, but a lot of it can get just very, unnecessary. But the fundamentals of sim racing and that translate towards those experiences are so good now. I think that's why, along with other racing media that's been very popular, racing has been on the up, is just how easy it is to get into now. You don't have to start in a car and, your IRL car is your first step ever towards the passion. You can do it in your basement and have hundreds of hours and race against professionals too. I mean, plenty of people have seen NASCAR drivers in their iRacing lobbies. I, for one, was briefly in a GT3, or maybe not GT3. I was briefly in an iRace session with Rubens Barrichello once, although I wasn't on track with him, but I saw his name at the top and I was like, wow. So, I could have literally just watched him or his laps and learned directly from a professional. That's why it's so great to learn from. There's nothing to hide or nothing to necessarily, gatekeep.
I was working on my oval license, and I got into a lobby, the practice lobby, before a race. I didn't get to race with them, but Hocevar was in it. And
yeah, he does a lot.
I don't want to know how many hours he's on a sim. But yeah, he's literally as rowdy in person as he is on his Twitch streams and Instagram reels. He's really that rowdy. And people taunt him. Like, once they figure out he's in there, they taunt him and they try to crash him on purpose. It's crazy. So anyway. Okay. Awesome. I do have a new segment, and I think you have some exposure with it since you have the NC. Maybe,
okay.
Maybe not. I don't know where it is and what it's got on it. But all right, in your race car, ABS or no ABS?
Ooh, that is a good question, because the NC does have ABS, but the CRX definitely does not have ABS. So I have experienced both. I think from a skill wise, I would say no ABS. There's a lot more control over it. Obviously, it's less of something to worry about, less fault, it's not as complex. But with the ABS purely just racing, it is nice to just smash the pedal and not worry about locking up at all. And then you just immediately have to worry about your brake release with trail braking. To pick between the two, that's tough. I'm gonna say no ABS, just because it is an extra edge over your competitors, and it's another skill that you can, if you refine it and you go into a race and you know that you have the confidence that you can you can gain a position by just being better on the brakes, better control. But the advantages of ABS are nice. Ice pedal does suck sometimes, but I don't think it's too big of a problem. When I first ran the NC, I was something everyone told me. It was like, oh, watch out for ice pedal, and I didn't really see it as that big of an issue. So I would say no ABS.
Okay. All right. I love my ABS, so you're not going to see me say that. But we're starting off the year a little rough. Now that I remember, it's 3 for no ABS, and no one's voted for ABS so far.
Wow.
So, all right. But in the NC, are you literally just mashing it? Or are you easing into it? And if it locks, it doesn't lock, but if it triggers, or, how are you treating that car?
So far, I'm mashing it. What I've found is I've done 2 race weekends in the NC so far, and compared to like sometimes with the CRX, I have to drive it gingerly sometimes, just being it's a much older platform. But with the MX5, I feel like I can go out there and just run it as hard as I can, turn it as hard as I can. I know that the first time that I drove that car, I remembered how fun it was to light the rear and slide a bit. So yeah, I'm going out there and smashing the pedal through, and whenever I feel the numbness of the ice pedal, I just push through it. So that's why I'm so excited for it, because the platform just feels so comfortable in terms of a driver's platform. It's just it takes whatever you want to do. And even though it's a much heavier chassis than what I'm used to, it doesn't feel that heavy. And a lot of that is due to the switch between no power steering and power steering, which is something that I had to get used to from the CRX. So it's a very good platform for someone who's just wanting to be competitive, especially in a spec class where you can throw it around and you can drive it very aggressively, and it doesn't react negatively. It just takes it.
So here's a follow-up ABS question for you. Are you running a more aggressive pad on the CRX than you are on the NC?
I think we are running a more aggressive pad, maybe about the same, but I believe there's a more aggressive pad. We run the Carbotech XP12s on the front of the CRX. And funny story, the rear pads on the CRX have never been changed. It does not use those rear brakes at all. They have this. We put a set of pads on there in 2022, and they have never come off because it just doesn't need it. But you can look at the pad and you're like, oh, those are fine. They have plenty of life, and they do, which is crazy to how we were learning and just seeing how little the rear does there. But on the MX5, we kept, just because I wanted to get as much learning experience in that platform, we kept the setup exactly the same as what RP had it in ITS trim. So we were running Hawk Blues, I believe, which was my first time running Hawks. So I don't actually completely know how they compare, but I think the XP12s might be a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah, they're a lot more aggressive.
They are? Okay. So yeah, starting next year, we'll be in Spec MX5, so that'll be a spec pad with the Padgets. So I don't know how those will compare with the Hawks yet either. But yeah, definitely more aggressive on the Honda.
Okay, sweet. I was just wondering. I'm going through my pad crisis where I can't find the Ray Bestis ST43s that I loved for so long. Well, for 2 years, because that's how long they lasted. And then I never found another set. So I've been on this search, and I think I'm way too aggressive of a pad for my ABS system. So, yeah. Anyway, Deacon, who do we need to thank? Those that support you and keep your race program going?
I want to thank OG Racing. I want to thank Firelapse and Race Setup Pro. They've been partners starting as of 2025, and I'm extremely excited to work with them again going into this year. I want to thank my parents for giving me the opportunity to race and fill out my dreams as a racer. I want to thank everyone who's cheered me on this year, and hopefully see us in IMSA next year.
Ooh, next year.
That's the goal. Okay. I would like to be in IMSA next year.
Awesome. So I will say, I mean, you're local to me, right? So it's not like we're strangers or anything. So, but I followed you on Instagram, which was it DG32 _ racing.
That's
right. Okay. Yeah. So I followed you on Instagram for a 3 years, maybe longer now. And I've watched your lap times drop. I've watched you consistently be up front, and I've watched you mature as a racer. And early on, I was like, oh, this kid, what's he doing? And then the next race, a little better. The next race, post-race, you're composed. If things don't go your way, still composed. You're still working your program. And for your age, that's rare. So I just want to say that from the outside looking in, you're doing the right things, and hopefully IMSA is in your future. So
I appreciate it. Yeah. And just a little snippet again on the goals. So this season we're going for the Mazda scholarship shootout. Mm-hmm. So that's why we went with the NC, was to pivot towards that and get onto that direct path up to Mazda. So the goal is to try to get to MX5 Cup as of right now. And I appreciate the words. They are definitely not overlooked. So yeah, that's always strive to be patient but competitive. So hopefully that'll all come too.
Oh, I'm 46 years old. It's a balance and maturity at my age. I remember being your age, and I could only imagine how I would deal with some of the things that I've had to deal with if I were younger. So you're doing great. I wish you all the best of luck, and I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, sir.
I really appreciate you having me on.
Until next time, keep working on yourself, keep working on the car, and let's get faster.